when I started the page, I was like, there are probably hundreds. There are thousands of people who have been negatively impacted by James River.
Welcome to the Bad Fruit Podcast. I am your host, Jonathan. Today's episode is a re-release of episodes 3 and 4 put together into one longer, continuous interview with Kadie. Previously, it had been 2 separate episodes, about an hour each. Now it's just about close to 2 hours long, and it's all in one place in this episode today. The reason that I'm re-releasing this is that every interview I've done since then has been one episode, regardless of how long the interview went. And so I thought that it would be good for listeners and just for anybody who wanted to hear it, is to hear it all in one place. I've also worked with the sound a little bit to make it a little bit better, a little bit louder. That was before we got the upgraded equipment. So hopefully it sounds a little bit better. So if you have not listened to my interview with Kadie, this is a great time to hear it all in one place. I think you'll enjoy it. I enjoyed having that conversation with her, and I think that she's got a lot of good insight into what was going on at James River. Well, thank you, Kadie, for being on the Bad Fruit Podcast. So you started a Facebook group, looks like last year, I believe, for people who have left James River or considering leaving James River. Before we get too deep into that, just a little bit about yourself, your experience with James River, how long you attended, were you involved in any ministries, and then we can kind of get into some deeper things there.
Yeah, so I am a mom of almost 3. We'll have our third in a few months. Yes, thank you. We went to James River for probably about 6 years. Started in 2015. My mom got invited to a Design for Life conference, which was just phenomenal. At the time, we were going to what my dad would call a pretty dead church, where I was really involved in a lot of stuff, but they had concerns about the theology, and things kind of started to come crashing down socially in that church for me. And so my mom got invited to the conference, and just there was this vast difference between the church we were attending, which had like no worship. You had people eating during worship, just kind of chatting. Yeah, very, very social church kind of place. And then you go to the conference, and you have all these women who look like they're worshiping and they're really into it, and just the atmosphere is so different. It feels like maybe this is a live church compared to a dead church. And so we started attending, and we got I wouldn't say my family got super involved right away. But like when they had that grow track, we did grow track, or I think my mom and I did. I don't remember if my brother and dad did, but I know we went and we would go to church, try every Sunday, try to go to the Wednesday night services. And eventually this was starting when I was a freshman in high school. By the time I was a junior, I had been in a pretty bad relationship with a guy. Story of a lot of people in high school.
Sure,
And
yeah.
when I got out, my parents had encouraged me to make friends because I didn't have a lot of friends. And so they told me to make friends at church. So I started making friends. I got involved in life group, and I kind of had an identity crisis when it came to breaking up with this guy. And so I decided I was just going to be on fire for God. I was reading all these charismatic books. I went to like the Outcry event that happened back in, I think it was like 2018 or 2017. Just this huge, like, it was Bethel and Mosaic and
All the big names.
all the big names. And so I was very involved. I wanted to, at the time I was considering taking a gap year, doing missions, doing all that stuff, because I really just didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I was a part of a program in my high school called Kickapoo University, is where I went, was Kickapoo. They have you do an internship. And so I felt like I want to do an internship in nonprofit, and it just so lined up that I could do it with Cherish Kids. So that's where I really started to get really involved. I did Cherish Kids for about 6 months back in 2018. So that fall I did that. And yeah, I just super into going from that point on. I think my dad eventually did like cameraman work. I can't remember what exactly his like title would have been as a volunteer. But yeah, we went up until around the first time that Bill Johnson came, and our family just got out right around like within weeks of that happening.
The Cherish Kids, is that the children's department?
That is the organization that essentially helps like with adoption and foster care.
Okay, okay.
And so what I would do as an intern, I guess I don't really know if I had an official title, but I interned the administrative assistant, who is just the sweetest person still, from what I can tell. We would go out to different counties like social work offices, and we would help like remodel if it was really dark and dingy because kids would be there. We would throw parties for them to show that we appreciated them. I know they would help in connecting families and training families to foster, and we even had to do a capstone project. And what I did my project on was promoting how important respite care is for foster families.
Okay.
And I don't think they ever implemented anything, but I had for my project developed a plan on how to get more members of James River involved in providing respite care. So that way, those families that were fostering would have the support they needed to continue fostering. So, and I remember we even did a thing where we bought gifts for those children. And part of my capstone project and telling my peers and my teachers about this, which it ended up being one of the top 8 that performed on like this special night. So I was really
Sure.
proud of it. But I noted that in some of these letters where these kids would write what they wanted for Christmas, one of the most heartbreaking things was, I just want a family.
Yeah.
And so just got to see a really different side of what James River was doing in that ministry. And there's nothing I can think of that was bad, but it
Right.
really got me thinking, like, yeah, no, what they're doing is like awesome because look at this amazing thing they're doing over here.
James River has done a lot of good in the
Yeah.
community. It's not a situation where it's all bad. Obviously, there's just certain things that people have been bringing to light. You mentioned going through Grow Track. I'm just really curious. I never went through Grow Track. I've known a few people who have. Their experiences are very interesting. My brother talks about it, just how he felt like it was sort of a pigeonhole thing of like, let's get you into ministry. If you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about your experience with Grow Track, did you feel that way?
Well, I didn't do the small class. I did
Okay.
that. I don't even know if it was the first one, but it was that big event where like everybody filled up the stadium seating and
Sure.
had a book and was filling it out. My take on it at the time was it was supposed to kind of prime you for what kind of ministry you could serve in. My opinion of it now is it's especially the way that they carried it out after this big event is that it's really how they try to, like you said, pigeonhole you. But I wouldn't necessarily just say in ministry, it's into unpaid labor, in my opinion, is quite honestly what it is. And it gives you all these options because if they don't have people they're kind of, if you will, testing to see, oh, would you fit in the children's department? Hey, you should go serve in the children's department. Nobody's going to watch the hundreds if not thousands of kids that show up every Sunday.
Absolutely.
And so that's kind of what I think of now, but at the time it was like, this is where God wants me to be. This is where my talents and passions are leading me.
Right. And what if you felt that you were supposed to be teaching or something like that? And the way that I've heard it described is that it kind of puts you mostly into volunteer type positions.
My testing had even showed that they give you multiple areas.
Okay.
One of mine, because I've been a musician as long as I can remember in some capacity, was to do the worship team. But I was like in high school, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
what are the chances I'm going to be led on the worship team? So even then, you have to question: do I want to try to risk it with the worship team? Because if you get on the worship team, that's a really big deal. Or do I just do the really easy work too? Like, do I
Right.
just be a greeter every Sunday? Do
Yeah.
I just so even if you are like qualified, if you will, to do something a little bit more higher up, I think the chances of you doing that are not very high. Like if you, I remember there were like a few labels they had in the test. One was like apostleship, the other one was like leadership. What's the likelihood you're gonna get all the way up to
Apostle.
leader? Yeah, yeah,
Hey,
it's
Bill, I'm an apostle too.
yeah.
Grow Track told me.
Well, and it's like, what are the chances that you're actually going to work your way up into more like leadership in a real meaningful capacity? You're not going to. Like at that point, you'd have to be hired. And I even applied for just something as simple as a cafe job, and they do like such screening for those jobs.
Really?
So yeah, it's like, what are the chances you're going to move up into a meaningful position based on what your test says? It's like not likely.
So you said that you left after Bill Johnson spoke the first time. Prior to leaving, were there any red flags that you saw while you were there?
Yeah. So when I had broken up with that boy, I was all in, right? Like on fire. You'd go to the worship experiences, it's all emotional. And it got to a point where that just started to feel like it was dying out.
Mhm.
James River talk, and a lot of churches in the NAR movement, I think for that matter, talk about the wet and the dry season. I
Sure.
think like Priscilla Schreier came and preached on. I think Lindel's preached on. Like everybody's preaching on it in the kind of modern Christian movement. And I had just kind of been in a really hard place for a while. I had gone to college. I went to Southwest Baptist University, and it's a Christian college, right? It's
Yeah.
supposed to be a Christian college, and I encountered a lot of issues there. Just like politically speaking, there was weird issues with how they ran things at the college, like dorm life was really just not run by good leaders, which thankfully are gone now. It just felt really overwhelming, like trying to be an adult, and I'm like, well, it must be, the dry season. We'll get to the wet season, right? Like the
Right.
only good thing at that time was, quite frankly, my boyfriend, now husband,
Mhm.
and me being together. And then we get to, this is 2019. So then we get to the end of the year, it's like new decades coming up. And we're gonna have a new normal. That was the whole big pitch is new normal. 2020 is the new normal. And that just didn't sit right with me. I'm like, so what? God's gonna be better just because the decade turns?
Right.
Like, and then what happened in 2020? A couple months later, the whole world shuts down for COVID.
Right.
And I'm out of college, and of course I'm freaking out because my boyfriend, like I said, now husband at the time, my husband was going to have to move back all the way to New York. And so I'm like, gosh, I'm gonna lose like the one friend I have at this point besides my local friends. And it just felt like everything was just going bad. And it's like I don't believe in the dry and the wet season garbage anymore. And then of course you had all the political stuff. Some people won't agree with me, but I don't think that James River handled some of the Black Lives Matter stuff like very well. I don't think it was very like I think it was very like socially driven.
Sure.
The way that they were catering to their congregation, regardless of how you fall theologically on that, just felt very pandering. They went from expository preaching to, I think I turned on one and it was like how to handle anxiety during the pandemic. It's like, yeah, that's so helpful. And
Right.
like the tone deaf, when they had the Easter service, this like tone deaf, we're gonna worship on the roof of James River at sunrise, and we're gonna video it and edit it, and we're gonna show you all on Easter Sunday. It really just started to be distasteful to me. And I remember when the church opened back up, I think that following July, bless my mom, I hope that she doesn't feel embarrassed when she hears, but I remember going to service with her, and I was not happy. I did not want to be there. Pretty sure I had my arms crossed during worship, just
Yeah.
standing there. And my mom got on to me. She was like, you're not into it. Like, come on, you need to be into it. Like you're just being like sour. Like,
Yeah.
you're being sour. And so I did eventually get back into it a little bit. But of course, I believe it was in 2021, Bill Johnson came, and I remember when that he and they announced that he was coming, we were all, my family was like, ooh, we know Bethel's not good.
Right.
Why is Bill Johnson coming? And once he came and gave his speech and all that, we were like, this church is heading in a new normal that is not normal or good.
Bill Johnson and Bethel, obviously, there's a lot of information about them out there. I know Bill Johnson claims to be, get downloads from God or whatever, and has said a lot of really weird things. And there's a lot of other weird things that have happened at Bethel that really make me question why John Lindell would even allow him in his church because he's associated with it. I don't know if you've heard of the tarot cards, that they're the destiny cards and the destiny
Yeah.
pants. So
They call it Christian Hogwarts is what some of the
yeah.
YouTube commentators call it.
Right, yes. It's funny because I don't think it's appropriate to have somebody like that when then you've also preached sermons on how bad yoga is. You
Yeah,
know,
some weird flip happened because I remember when that happened. Springfield News Leader came after him, and
sure.
just everybody was like, "How dare you!" But if I don't remember if this was something that was a thing, but I seem to remember that they also had like Christian like I can't remember what they called it, but it was similar to what SVU did, where it's like stretch and flex. Like we're gonna do something similar to yoga, but it's not yoga. So
Yes.
it's like because they had that fitness center, so they still split hairs there as far as I'm concerned. But
Right. I actually, yeah, I think James River did have a Christian, I'm doing air quotes right now,
yeah,
Christian yoga type thing. And I believe you are correct about that. And they may have stopped it after because they were kind of called out for
yeah,
hypocrisy there, but
yeah. And I never attended, so it's just something I
yeah,
seem
me
to
neither.
remember happened, but I was not directly involved. So
I'm not a yoga guy. But my only point with that was just to have Bill Johnson with all of his problematic things. And like I said, they had Destiny cards, Destiny pants. They're like yoga pants that Bill Johnson's daughter-in-law or somebody was selling at like some new age festival.
Yeah.
And if you wore these yoga pants, God would give you your destiny or something.
Well,
So
even
very weird stuff.
even outside of Christian Hogwarts, I think the epitome of cringy material that has come out of Bethel was when they "You shall not pass" from Lord of the Rings, but like racism. Have you seen that video?
No, I have not.
Oh, well, basically, I don't know what kind of conference or what it was, but they got all these leaders on a stage and they got a staff, like Gandalf's staff. And I can't remember what they said exactly because I'm on the spot, but they basically like slammed the staff and declared racism to be gone.
How dare they appropriate Gandalf? I love
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings. I'm offended for
Yeah, I
Tolkien
want to
in
say it
his
was.
grave.
Yeah, I want to say it was racism. I don't want to go back later and be like, oh, I messed up. But yeah,
I'm gonna find that clip and share it on the Facebook page here because that needs to get out there. That
yeah,
is awful.
whatever it was, if it wasn't racism, they did the staff and they banned, or they're like, we declared this to be gone, and it's like, what?
Yeah, I know Tolkien's rolling over in his grave right now because of that. Yeah, so kind of going back just a little bit here, while your time at James River, did you have any connection? Did you meet with any of the Lindels or anybody in that kind of higher up circle of leadership?
So I kind of have three really weird instances, and I'll say they're pretty cringy just because you feel like you're in the presence of a celebrity.
Sure.
But the first was back when the church was a little bit smaller than it is now, like maybe in 2017. The guy I was dating at the time, he and I were going together to the church, and he brought a friend that wasn't a Christian, and the guy had questions for the pastor. And it was a Wednesday night. He's like, I'm gonna go ask the pastor. He walked right up to John, and so
Okay.
I was with him, and I remember at the time being like, "Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, like, what do I do?" And just like
Can we do
freaking,
this?
yeah, like, can we even approach him? And and to John's credit, he did have a conversation with him.
Sure.
This was in a different time, I guess. So that was at that time, I'm like, wow, our pastor is approachable.
Yeah.
No. So I got close in vicinity. I didn't talk to him, but I was there and I witnessed that conversation. And then a part of that same program with Kickapoo University, you have to job shadow. And so I decided to job shadow somebody in the women's department. I don't even remember the position or the name of the girl, but I remember I went in and I sat and I job shadowed when they were in the office. And Debbie came in and she just waved like I was just a normal person in there. Didn't say, I don't recognize you, or you must be
Yeah.
new, or hey, my name is just, hi, girls, hi. And
Yeah.
just went back to her office, like very whimsically, like, hello, Princess Wave. And so I'm like, I just saw Debbie.
Right.
Guys, I was in the presence of Debbie Lindell. And then the third instance was I had started a very cringy podcast that hopefully there's no trace on the internet anybody can find. This was when I was getting soup. I was like, I'm gonna be a world changer. I'm gonna be like the Sadie Robertson, like the Lisa Harper. That was something I wanted to do, which
Mhm.
they kind of market that as like a career opportunity to
Sure.
youth. Like, you're gonna do this, and so I thought I would. I had a history in speech and debate and just talking, and I loved it. So I started a podcast thinking I was gonna be like, awesome and grow it. And my one of my family members who was very involved in the church had met or she always has a way of meeting people, but she had met Savannah
Okay.
and got Savannah to follow my podcast and my personal
Hey,
account
there you
on
go.
Instagram. And in hindsight, I kind of wonder if that's like I don't want to use this word because of the way that it's associated, but like grooming in the sense of like kind of seeing who is material to be a part of the church, like not in the weird political way we use that word, but just kind of
Right.
following who might be material for James River, who might be
Like if your podcast had taken off and it was
yeah,
starting to grow, then they could be like, I mean, I'm speculating here, but it could be like, we helped foster that. We were
yes.
there at the beginning
Or
and
kind
kind
of
of co-opted
like
it.
yeah, like spotting talent. Like that's what I mean by like the word.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of a better word, but
Or also maybe to kind of watch out if there's this podcast from some girl in our youth department and they start
yeah.
saying things that we don't want them to say. I don't
Yeah.
know. Again, I'm kind of speculating here. But
Yeah. Then of course I'm speculating, but she had followed my stuff. I'm sure that my family member gave a pitch of how I was wanting to.
yeah,
I was considering going to the college too at the time, which
the James River College.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
thank the Lord I didn't. That's kind of the closest I've ever gotten to the Lindels, and I remember when one day I went through my, and I don't think I did anything particularly, but I got an app where you could see who's unfollowed you on Instagram. Like, well, I'm not going to follow all these people who have unfollowed me. And I did notice that she did unfollow me eventually. And it's probably because I wasn't putting out content or, anything like that. So that's kind of why I think they maybe spot talent like that.
So while you were going there, what sort of ministries did you serve in? I know you said the Cherished Kids. Did you participate in any other ministry opportunities?
I very minorly did like kids ministry and it was not the thing for me for a little while. And then after that big pinnacle moment, that breakup, that's basically my reference point. After the breakup,
Before and after, yeah.
yeah, after the breakup, I got really involved in trying to volunteer in the children's and the youth camps.
Okay.
I think at one point I'd come out of a youth camp and I was like, are there any more positions for the next camp? And the first one I served at, I think it was the first one. They're like, well, we have some spots, we need camp support. So I'm like, sign me up.
So are you in high school at this time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you're
No,
serving in
17.
camp support. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah, and so I went to the camp and it was some like mixed grade, like they have middle school and high school. This
Sure.
was some middle like 7 through 9 or something.
Okay.
That's why I was technically old enough to serve. I don't remember if it was this camp or one of the later ones I did. If you're a youth, they had you like pay or they asked you to pay because
Weird.
I think it's the same thing that they do for the women's conference where it's like if you volunteer because you're still attending, we'll give you a discounted ticket. And so that's part of how I don't know if you knew that.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
So you volunteer to serve at a
Mhm.
Design for Life or a men's conference. You still pay to go?
If I remember right, yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it was years ago, but I want to say that yeah, they had like these volunteer tickets and they were cheaper. I at least seem to remember that. Not that I ever paid a volunteer ticket, but I seem to remember that being a thing.
Yeah.
But that's the same thing for camps. Like if you were
Sure.
younger, I think it was the number 25 sticks out in my head. Like maybe it was like $25 or something cheaper. But I did camp support the first time. And that's basically the people who like wake you up in the morning, like I think take out garbage and put out those ginormous water containers for everybody. I can't remember anything else we did. And I went and that it wasn't the best experience. It wasn't for me because I'm not into carrying giant water jugs. Like, I'm a really small person.
Sure.
Well, I don't know about now, like being pregnant, but I was a very small person. I was like 100 pounds. Like I'm trying to help carry
The
around.
water is 100 pounds inside.
Yeah, like driving golf cart, just being silly. And I remember that first camp. There was, because I'm feeling very spiritual at this camp. I'm in a position where I'm not the student. I walked in to make sure that we could lock up the dorms, 'cause that was one of our things, and there was a girl just crying, would not be consoled. And there was an adult team leader, it wasn't even a teenager or a college student, it was looked like somebody's mom. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure she was a mom. And she was trying to get this girl out, she just wouldn't come. And she's also trying to get like her whole other team out to the I can't remember what they call it, the pavilion. And so I was like, I'll get her out of here. I'll talk to her. Just, we weren't provided any training for camp support really, like you would leadership. And so I take her and I figured the best place to go would be the steps of the leadership lodge because it's right in view of, all the big youth pastors. It's right out in the open. It's not off somewhere creepy.
Sure.
And I asked her, I'm like, what's going on? And this girl basically told me that I don't know if it was something they had preached on or whatever, that everybody was just confessing their deepest, darkest sins to each other and they needed to get over them. And she didn't want to.
Sure.
And I told her, I was like, well, I don't think you have to do that. Like, nobody
Right.
can make you. And I said, it doesn't make you a bad Christian. I just told her, I was like, listen, we all do and have done things that, should we talk to somebody about? Yeah. Does it need to be strangers in your camp group? No. Like,
Right.
if you're feeling weighed down by something, maybe it would be good to talk to somebody. Go talk to somebody at home. If you feel comfortable, talk to your parents. Talk to whoever you would trust in your everyday life. And she didn't tell me, and I didn't ask her.
Right.
And then I prayed for her and she bounced off and went and had fun. No big deal. I'm like, wow, like that was a Holy Spirit moment, right? And then I don't know if I can say names or if this would be a person's name, I should say, but the head youth leader at the time, his wife, had been watching from some sort of distance, I imagine, because she came up to me afterwards and she said, what was that about? And I'm like, oh, I was so excited to share this. I was like, this is what it was about. This girl, she's really distraught. She went back and all the stuff. And she basically told me, on the one hand, that next time that happens, I need to go get a head pastor. Which, if it's because I was a minor as well, like as an adult, I understand that
Sure.
perspective. But that's not really how she communicated it to me. What she said to me was because I'm camp support, my job isn't to pray for people. If somebody needs prayer, to go get a pastor. or a leader. So I was disqualified for praying for this girl because I was just camp support. I was just the unpaid labor of water gallon moving, and
who paid to go there too.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't remember if I actually paid. I just know they asked me to. And it may have been the camps I served at the next year.
Sorry.
I decided never to do camp support again after this, like at all. Yeah, I remember being so embarrassed. I was like, oh my gosh, they're gonna think so little of me. I remember like going up to the bunk that I was in and just laying down and crying and wanting to go home and feeling like I couldn't. And I was like, I don't want to be here anymore. And that's a terrible feeling when you're just trying to help somebody. And what probably should happen in that situation is just a conversation of, hey, go get an adult.
Yeah.
Go get an adult next time.
But you basically shared the gospel message, which is we all fall short.
Yeah.
Your dark sins don't have to be confessed because whether they're dark or not, we all just need grace. We all need God. And then you prayed with her. Like,
Yeah.
I don't see anything inappropriate. I remember going to church camps when I was a teenager. My friends, we would have conversations like that. They weren't leaders at all. They weren't even staff. They weren't even servants, or servants. You know what I mean?
I mean, it felt like
Well,
for sure.
yeah. Maybe that was a good
unpaid labor.
Unpaid labor, yes. That doesn't seem out of the norm, especially somebody who is representing James River. You would think that they would be totally fine with you praying.
Yeah, like if the issue is truly that, hey, you're not an adult, go get an adult, then just say that next time. Don't say that because I'm camp support, I'm not supposed to pray for people, because then you're butting me up against leaders who are my age, who just signed up earlier, who were leading groups.
Sure.
And of course they're really, and I'm not even saying out of place, but they don't provide good training. I did a kids camp the following year, and I sat there like, go pray with your leaders. And I sat down and nobody instructed the leader, at least to me, like, hey, go get another leader to do it with you. So these like pile of kids just surround me. They're just like, you. And so I just start talking, and one of the more, it was a son of somebody who's very high up at James River. So,
Yeah.
has that mentality and that attitude, but came over and basically was like, oh, I'll join you. I'm like, okay. And then afterwards he's like, next time don't do that alone. And that's like all the talking I got. I was like, he's like, you're not allowed to do that alone. So they don't even provide good training. It's like always like revert to like the head pastor. It's like just, you really are just kind of unpaid labor at that point. And
Right.
it's very weird. And running camps like that, you have to have that
Sure,
in order to make it work. But it was just chaos.
Well, it sounds like you didn't really know what you could or couldn't do. So, like when you talk about not having really training, you have a bunch of kids, you're doing stuff, and then they're like, "Oh, you weren't supposed to do that." You're like, I didn't know I was supposed to do that. You're praying with somebody, you're like, I didn't know I wasn't supposed
Yeah.
to. Like, so not only were you just trying to do the right thing, but then you also weren't really told what you could and couldn't do.
It wasn't constructive. Like that's what made it like
Right.
embarrassing too. And I even hold the opinion, and I know not everybody will hold this opinion, that you really don't need kids. And I would even say college age kids leading middle schoolers and high schoolers, in my opinion. That's just really, like, I look at myself, like I'm 23 and a half right now. So, I'm a little bit older than some of these leaders I had.
Right.
And I'm looking back thinking I am not spiritually qualified in a lot of ways to like lead the way that I think would be effective for some of these kids. Not to say I can't do anything, but speaking of when I was 17, 18, this is going to sound so petty. And I want the people listening to this to know I've grown a lot since then. But I remember there was a girl who was a couple years younger than me that was serving with me. I think this was maybe like a middle school group we did. And one girl decided she wanted to be baptized, and you have the pastor, because they did baptisms like in the lake on
Okay.
The campus. And so you had one pastor who would be down there, and then you could take one leader. And I remember she was like, I want to baptize. I'm like, I want to baptize somebody. That sounds fun. Like to baptize somebody.
You weren't thinking of the theological implications or anything like that.
Like, yes, I get to baptize somebody. And of course, like I'm a kid, right? Like
Right.
realistically, I may have been 18, but for all intents and purposes, I'm a kid leading kids.
Yes.
And yeah, so it came down to, well, we'll ask the girl who she wants, and she picked me, and I'm like, yes. But even then, like, and I laugh at it, it doesn't make me mad. But at the time, I was a little like upset, but she kept trying to inch her way into helping this baptism. Like, I'm gonna put my hand behind her head. Like,
Yeah.
You just want to be so close and so involved because like it makes you feel important, and you just see that all over the place with camp. It's just kids want to be important at camp and not be the kids at camp. They want to be the leaders at camp.
And I've heard similar stories at James River just in general. And maybe it's really not a James River thing. Maybe that's any sort of bigger church situation. I'm sure people that go to Bethel or Hillsong kind of have
Or
that
just like
same.
big youth groups like
Yeah,
that
anything
even.
in that kind of situation. But since we are kind of talking about our local mega church in this capacity, I've heard stories of just people who serve on different teams at James River. It's like you said, when Debbie walks in, you're just like, oh my gosh, she looked at me, she smiled, and there is a little bit of that, especially early on when they're kind of bringing you into different ministries and things like that, or serving. So yeah, the camp experience sounds like it's kind of a microcosm for kind of some of the other
Well,
departments.
and you're making me think of something really quickly. I totally forgot I did. But the DFL where it was like was it the Let There Be Light year? I think it was like I don't know, it was late 2010s. I basically because I knew somebody got invited to be in the opener.
Hmm.
And that's kind of the same thing as camp where it's like I remember at first I was supposed to be on stage and it's like I'm gonna be on stage at at the time it was JQH, now it's like what Great Southern Bank Arena. It's like I'm gonna be on the stage and it's gonna be so cool. And then I remember being so upset because they had the rehearsal and I was there, but because I was on the front line, they completely changed who was gonna be on stage and my mom and I laughed because I was one of the lantern worshipers up in like the nosebleed section, but I felt so involved. I had a costume and
Yeah.
same kind of thing, even if you're a volunteer for those, I don't know what it looks like now, but at the time, those big conferences.
Yeah. So did you volunteered at a few of those then?
One that I think one DFL that I can remember. I did other volunteer stuff at DFLs, but the year I'm thinking of, the other year I volunteered was I did Cherish Kids stuff. So as part of my internship, and I was basically just trying to raise awareness about
Yeah.
them. And that was different. Like, it was just you're out there at a booth right next to the James River College people.
Sure. Yeah. So any of your volunteer experience at any of these events, what was that kind of like? The environment for the volunteers? Were you given food? Was it a long day? Like what kind of experience was it like for you?
I wouldn't say it was bad outside of like the like the closer you were to leadership, I think the more stressful it wasn't. And that's not even saying like close to the Lindels, just closer to maybe management is the best way I can describe it,
Right.
like in camps and whatever. But if you're just like a general volunteer, they just really hype you up. Like, yeah, they feed you, they'll give you a t-shirt, they're gonna just hype you up. I remember I was a door greeter for the Stronger Men's Conference in like 2018, I think. And I was just like, I'm gonna be the most excited girl here. And I was just like, welcome to the stronger. I was just holding a sign, opening doors. I was just like,
Over the top.
way more like I think people would mistake me for an extrovert after that experience, which I am not. But yeah, I mean they treat you at least in my experience pretty okay in that regard.
Okay.
But like I said, I think the closer you get to maybe like micro, I say micro, like managing the smaller moving parts, I think that gets a little bit different.
Yeah, and I was just asking what your experience was like. I don't know.
Yeah.
I never served in any of that kind of capacity.
You feel very important. They do make you feel like you are doing God's work. Smiling and waving at that person who may not know Jesus, you're doing the Lord's work.
Yep. I mean, if nobody shook their hand, then they might not come to the Lord today. Who knows?
Yeah.
So why did you ultimately decide to leave? Kind of maybe I know you mentioned it was after Bill Johnson, and you had mentioned a few other things about kind of healing and stuff like that. Whatever you kind of feel comfortable talking about.
So James River was pretty big into some of the charismatic things as long as I've been there. It was pretty minor for a while, like speaking in tongues, which I was pretty divided on myself, but I didn't grow up with that. So it's kind of that's where it started. And then the healing stuff seemed pretty minor for a while and I wasn't bothered by it. But while everything's progressing, I have a brother who's younger than me. And he, for most of his life, I don't really remember at what point my parents noticed this or when he got diagnosed, but he has tinnitus and deafness in one ear or profound hearing loss.
Okay.
Which, I remember growing up, he would get bullied for having a hearing aid in school. He was very insecure about it. And what kid wouldn't be,
Yeah.
kids just want to be normal. And I remember that while this healing stuff was going on, my brother would start to ask questions about healing and if his ear's going to get healed. And when the healing stuff started to ramp up, he really started to think God's going to heal me. Because, and in the youth groups, it was very different than the adult services. The best way I can describe it is that anything spiritual that happens in the youth group makes you a better Christian than everybody. Which this happens in the adult world too, but it's on like a social peer, like immature level, like what you would think of in school.
Right.
Where it's like, well, God loves me because he healed me of my anxiety, or God loves me because he did this. And I never witnessed this, but my brother said he would cry out to God. He would cry out, just asking him to heal his ear. And his tinnitus, as far as I understand, talking to him is very like crippling to deal with. Like it's all the time,
I couldn't imagine.
24/7. And not to mention the profound hearing loss as well. Like some people have just tinnitus, and so he really struggled with that. And this is somebody who got baptized on my birthday when I was 15. So this isn't somebody who was just kind of like, oh, I don't know. Like this was somebody who at one point in my life was very, on fire for this. And going to James River, that just really killed it out of him. He started to, I would say, drift away from his faith, question if God loves him. One thing he said to my dad that my dad told me about was he had said at one point, I believe he said, God doesn't hear me or God doesn't listen. As as far as he knows, the people with anxiety and depression, they're getting healed, but why not him? Like, what is he doing wrong? And family members of mine who went to the church would say things, well, you're not behaving right, or you're not doing this right, you're not leaning in, or you're not crying out enough, and turned it into a works-based faith, essentially. Like you aren't doing enough, and that's why you're not getting healed. And this was reinforced by the church. So this all led up, my mom would go to these Wednesday night services, just praying, asking, thinking, what's the next thing I can do right? My family got into a position where I don't think it was related to my brother's hearing, but it's like we need to give, we need to be more involved, we need to do these things. Because they talk about the mysterious checks in the mail, but all of that led up to when Bill Johnson came. We already didn't like Bill Johnson.
Right.
We just didn't like him. His theology was weird. This was when the grave soaking was really talked about on the internet. This was like we had kind of gotten onto the anti Bethel bandwagon right after the Wake Up Olive incident because that was all over the media. So when Bill Johnson came, we didn't go to the Wednesday night. My mom was really torn, I remember, and I think it had to do with, the healing stuff. That following Sunday, I believe he was my fiance at the time, now husband, but we've been through all this together. But we went and I was frantic. I'm in a rush, like, we got to get good seating. We're going to miss the seating. So I call my mom. I'm like, where are you? Because my dad at this point was serving as like a camera person. I was like, do we need to sit next to dad? And she, in tears, told me that they weren't going. And I can't remember if they had watched online or if they had heard that at that service, allegedly, a couple people with deafness or tinnitus in their right ear, which I think is the same as my brother, at least the right. Now that I'm on the spot, I can't think, but were healed.
Yeah.
So I think, made my mom feel like so guilty. Like, gosh, maybe I missed out on God's presence because I didn't take my son.
Sure.
Why is this happening to other people, but not my child? And my brother still, I think, really struggles with God and all of that. And I think that James River, of course, didn't contribute entirely to my brother's perspective on the church and whatnot, but I think it very, very heavily damaged it. It was at least the catalyst for why he does not have that same view that he did as like a teenager.
Right.
And so that was the last Sunday I remember going, was that Sunday where they talked about Bill Johnson. And I remember, because to me, my mom's crying on the phone, like, I just feel so sad. And then they regurgitate the same thing once we're in service because we were already there. Because even I was like, gosh, like, did we miss out on something?
Right.
Are we not good enough Christians? And really a works-based faith, which is funny because they at one point preached grace so much at James River, but now it's all about how much are you praying? How much are you tithing? How much are you doing this? Of course, for me, I already was pretty comfortable leaving because I had kind of been going to a small Baptist church with my fiance. It was closer to campus. Of course, there was political stuff I didn't like. Like, I already had a backdrop to leave. That was the final straw.
And one of the issues with a lot of the ultra charismatic stuff, and I do want to distinguish because I don't believe that traditional Pentecostal AG churches are necessarily wrong. I may not agree with some of the theology that they have, but some of the more charismatic, ultra charismatic, the Bill Johnson type, where there is such a heavy emphasis on healing, a lot of the healings that are promoted are, not to say that tinnitus is something that isn't recognizable. I mean, obviously, if you had that and you were healed by it, you would definitely know you were healed by it. But it's hard for me to know if you actually have tinnitus, I guess would be a good way of putting it, right? If you
Yeah.
have anxiety, I don't really know if you do or not. And so if you tell me you've been healed of tinnitus or anxiety or, a lower back pain, which is a lot of their things,
Yeah.
it's not something that I can verify happened or didn't happen. Not to say that it doesn't, but it's interesting that that's a lot of their miracles that they broadcast are things like those that are a little more nuanced. And then the people who are actually struggling with it, like your brother, if they're not healed, you're like, but I heard somebody else had this same issue and they didn't get healed, or
Yeah.
they got healed and I didn't get healed. And that can be kind of just a blow to your faith. And then you say things like, well, maybe you're just not tithing enough, or maybe you start to question if God even loves you. And the gospel message is not works based at all. We are saved by grace through faith, not by our works, so that nobody can boast, right? Like
Yeah.
that's one of the most beautiful verses in the entire Bible, because it isn't us, it's God who does everything. Even the faith that saves us is a gift from God.
Well, and
And so,
it's the ultimate miracle, really. Like
right,
of all things that you can get from God and from Christ, like eternal life is the biggest of them. Like if
absolutely.
you have cancer and it's like you either get healed of cancer or you can have eternal life through Jesus Christ who
Yeah.
loves you. They're obviously the bigger miracle is the last right there. And at James River, they make it seem like God is going to do more. And I don't think they've ever explicitly said this, but the message I really get now, especially, is that you get saved, but then there's more than salvation and
Yes.
somehow more important. And so, even though for somebody like my brother, it's like salvation is the greatest gift. It is the greatest miracle, especially with how like awful humanity is. Like God doesn't
Yeah.
have to save us, right? He didn't have to save us. That they really do still emphasize the miracles being and the healing being like the greatest thing you could get. And if you're not getting it yet, of course, now it's like I said, lean in, or maybe you're just so close, or if you get a half healing, you're almost there. Like, just
Sure.
don't let it go.
And like you said, salvation, the fact that God came to earth and died for our sins so that we may have eternal life is such a wonderful miracle in and of itself. And Paul struggled with something. We don't know what he struggled with, but he struggled with it. God didn't heal him of that. There's a passage, and I'm drawing a blank right now. I believe it was Titus. I could be wrong. Somebody will tell me I'm wrong, I'm sure. But he basically says, drink some wine for that stomach issue you have,
Yeah.
and it'll make you feel better and keep on with the ministry. If we were going to say that, and this might, if you're charismatic and you're listening, you're like, oh my gosh, you're going off in the weeds. But if we're going to say that the book of Acts is always for today, or that God's intention is always to heal, why didn't Paul get healed, and why didn't, if it was Titus, I just can't remember off the top of my head, but why didn't they get healed, or Timothy? And they didn't. They had those ailments, whatever it was.
Like, what did they do to deserve it? Like, that would
But
be my
we
question.
would look at them and say those are the greats, right?
Yeah.
I mean, sure, Bill Johnson might be an apostle, but so was Paul. So all that to say that this hierarchy or anything like there's something more to salvation, there's really not.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, there's sanctification. Salvation is justification. We're justified before the Lord, we're saved, and then there's sanctification, which is an incomplete process that we just, the Lord works on us, right?
Yeah.
We little things, but if God decides to heal you, it's going to be because he decides to heal you. And I'm not a total cessationist that says that God can't heal
Yeah.
anybody. I mean, I pray for healing when I have a stomach ache. If my kids are sick, I pray for them. If it happens, it happens.
Yeah, and it really muddles the water. Like, does everybody get healed? Does nobody get healed? Something that I tend to think, and I think this will make the charismatics gasp, because like, I'm not a total cessationist, but I am very skeptical of signs and wonders today.
Absolutely.
I watched a documentary, and I don't agree with everything that the guy says on his channel, but his name's Spencer Smith, and he runs the Third Adam series. I think, very interesting documentary series.
Hmm.
He talks about how a lot of the things that are going on in these churches, especially Bethel, mirror a lot of these Eastern religion
Yeah.
practices. That he was a missionary. I mean, he looked at it overseas as a missionary,
Hmm.
and I've not seen anybody talk about it. And I'm not an expert on Reiki. I would love to talk to somebody who is like somebody who, not that I condone it, but somebody involved in Reiki, because
Yeah.
the thing that has stood out to me the most about a lot of these James River healings, I don't think people are crazy. Not everybody's lying. Not everybody's like the toe situation, is that they say they feel a lot of heat. in one place. And what little I know about Reiki is supposed to be very energy based like that.
Right.
And I do think that there is something like demonic going on in the church when it comes to at least some of the signs and wonders. The way they're being sought is
Mhm.
very new age, and new agers have success in some sense. It's not from God, right? And
Yes.
so it really makes me think that even if people are unaware, and I think that's the saddest part, I think people are deceived, that there might be like genuine healings in that sense, but I don't necessarily know if they come from the Lord with what little I know of Reiki. And that's the really scary thing to me
Absolutely.
is, like I'm sure there may and probably are have been healings at James River that are legitimate, who like we ultimately won't know, right? But there are some that really just that pattern of what people describe really starts to scare me with what I've heard from people who have come out of the new age.
And the other thing we have to kind of consider, like what you're saying with the new age and Reiki, is that good things can happen. When I say good things, I
Like
mean positive,
consequentially, yeah.
positive things for your health, your body, whatever, can occur outside of the church. I know we like to think we own these things, but it can happen. There's a documentary. I'm totally losing my mind on what it's called right now. But there's this guy. He's of Indian descent, but grew up in New York City. He was like seeing all these gurus, right?
Mhm.
And so he decided to go kind of figure out what was going on. And so he goes to India and he starts studying all these gurus. And he starts noticing that a lot of them are faking it. Even
Yeah.
like modern gurus over there, they're just kind of faking it. So he also there's a little bit of like him upset about cultural appropriation in America of people who aren't really Indian pretending to be gurus. So he decides to come back to the United States and he creates this entire persona and he's this guru. And he goes to LA, I believe, and he starts getting these people to come to his yoga, or he goes to yoga studios in different places and he starts gaining this following. And he has a massive impact on their lives. People's relationships get better, love lives, job, career, purpose in life is all better. He makes up all the words. He makes up all the moves. Just made them up. There's not real yoga moves. There's these chants that they're doing are just gibberish. They're not even real. It's not even fake magic or like whatever. It's like literally just fake, just 100% fake. And all these people come to him and they're like they want to follow this guy. He's like almost like
It's like
a
very
savior to
Jesus
them.
like,
Yeah. And then he says he has to leave, so he leaves and they all cry and everything. And he comes back and he's shaved his beard off. He's got, clean cut hair and he does this big reveal. A bunch of people walk out just immediately. And this one lady had actually taken his whole system and was teaching it. And so she walks out. She's mad because she's been fooled. But a lot of people went up to him and were like, I don't I don't even care if it was fake. It was working. What you were telling me was
Yeah.
working. All that to say that sometimes it's just the power of suggestion.
Yeah, like placebo effect.
When you are talking about some of these healings, I do believe you mentioned demonic, you mentioned New Age. I believe there is an element of that, especially with Bill Johnson and a
I
little
think
bit
the
of
way that some of them are approached,
yeah.
specifically.
And I would say specifically Bethel, like when we joke about it being Hogwarts, Christian Hogwarts or whatever, like honestly, Hogwarts is probably more Christian than Bethel. You know what I'm saying? Like the actual book is probably better for you than the stuff going on at Bethel because it's just at least that's fiction. This is
Yeah.
people pretending to be Christian.
At
And
least in the book, nobody in Harry Potter is like, I am a Christian
yes,
witch. like,
exactly. Joking
like we
that
shouldn't be having that in the church.
it's so bad exactly we shouldn't and it's so bad what's going on there. And so I do believe there is the new age element, there is which I guess we could just call demonic, all that going on, and then some of it I do believe is just fake.
Yeah.
It's just straight up
Well, yeah,
fake.
you saw that with the toe, which I mean, like that wasn't even like suggestion. That was just like some of it is truly just a lie.
Yeah.
Some of it's suggestion. Some of it I do think is not. Some of it may be real. But if you're not willing to acknowledge to some extent, like, hey, maybe not everything in here,
Hmm.
especially when the scripture talks about looking out for signs and what they're going to be fake signs and wonders. If you're not willing to admit that,
Hmm.
maybe we should be skeptical. That's concerning. If you're in
Absolutely.
somewhere like James River or Bethel.
You mentioned the toes. That happened last year. Did that happen before or after you started the
It was during the same week of power for about a year. So Bill Johnson came, I think, a second time in 2022. I
Mhm.
was, I was pregnant and freshly quit my job and very bored at home. And so I really felt, I don't want to say like led, just I felt very convicted. Like there is not a voice against James River anywhere. You see it about Hillsong, you see it about Bethel, you see it about all these churches, but there's nothing against James River. And I remember I had posted something on Facebook, and I don't know if it was just like public and I didn't mean for it to be, but it went all over the place. There was a pastor of a Bolivar church who was arguing with this like pregnant young soon to be mom who like didn't have a job, just like in her like apartment, was getting real mad at me on Facebook, and so it blew up. And it had actually, I think, really contributed to the end of one of my really good friendships. There, I have a I say former friend, like I don't have anything against her now, but we're not close. She was my maid of honor, actually. Very close with her, who was very involved, and even she messaged me and was like, "You need to stop talking bad about the church. You know, like this is upsetting." And I just really was like, there needs to be something. And so I contemplated, should I do YouTube? Like, is it even possible to do a documentary of my skill set? It's not. I just felt very, very convicted for that whole year because there just wasn't a space for people like me and my family to talk.
Mhm.
And it just dawned on me one day with the week of power. I was like, Facebook group, like, why not a Facebook group? And it just blew up that same week. It had blown up so much that I wanted it to be public, but there was so much going on that I ended up having to make it a private group. And now I have to vet people. And anytime James River has something go wrong, hundreds of requests I have to read through, and I feel so bad because it takes me so long. But yeah, it was the same week. And what's interesting, and I don't want to like take like credit in like an arrogant way or whatever, but I remember what was so funny was I had gotten so many messages on Facebook, and one girl, and I feel terrible. I never messaged her back, so I was so busy, but I was so compelled by what she sent me. She sent me screenshots of basically this girl's Facebook and what her toes looked like before the week of power and what they looked like, you know. Well, maybe she didn't send me what they looked like afterwards, but I think she did send me what they looked like before with a timestamp from her own Facebook page, and it looked like basically kind of what she was describing, like, oh, the toenails didn't come. Oh, did the toenails come back? And I don't know if this is where they specifically got it from, but I remember I reached out to show me the toes, and I was like, "Hey, this has come from somebody I'm not going to name. I don't necessarily feel the need that you should name me." And like, I say this not to take credit, but really just to share that they were like, "Well, we view Chrissy as kind of a victim in all this." I'm like, oh, okay. And then she got on that podcast. And so then photos were out. They took the photos, whether it was from me or somebody else. And yeah, that all went down around the same time that the page was starting. I think that's really what drove a lot of people to the page. But one person who's pretty outspoken about this had very early on posted that the woman was questionable. And yeah, it was from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Just the thing on that page, the toes.
What were your thoughts when the whole show me the toad thing went down? Were you following that
Yes.
fiasco going down? Like, what were your thoughts? Did you believe it was a real healing? And then tack onto that a question of when John said that he had seen the picture of the toes, did you believe him? And then now maybe talk about the stuff that's come out most recently.
So I didn't. I know there are a lot of people who are like, well, I don't doubt that. Well-meaning people. It's not a criticism of their faith. A lot of well-meaning people are like, well, God can heal, and He can.
Sure.
But I was like, no, this didn't happen, and especially with some of the news stories about how she lost her toes, kind of her personal life. Not saying God can't, but like, are you like a real Christian? Are you just somebody who attends James River? Like what are the circumstances, and how does this actually edify the body? First off, Lyndall and Bill's stories don't match up. That's or Chrissy's. Those three testimonies did not line up. That's like
Right, it's weird.
like telephone. I'm like, no, this didn't happen. So that's why I didn't believe it. When he said he saw pictures, and I can't really say verbatim, but basically he wasn't going to show them. He wasn't going to do anything. To me, it was very much an internal control type, damage control type situation.
Mhm.
Like, not that I'm like very experienced work wise, but my degree was in public relations, so I studied some of this in college. But I think that really a lot of his messaging appealed to the congregation, like, oh, we're going to protect one of our own. But in reality, if you already like gave her information and her testimony out publicly, so you're not protecting her. That's why Show Me the Toes for a while there stood by her as a victim, which I totally understand. But it was a kind of a PR stunt to protect them to not release the photos. But my perspective is you know, you would think that if God did something like this, first off, you would think that somebody, if somebody's toes, let's just really visualize this for a second.
Right.
If somebody's toes were actually growing out of their foot in real time, with TikTok and Snapchat, you're telling me nobody thought to go click video? Like nobody? Like I don't that's first off. But second off, to not show pictures, like that would be one of the greatest things to edify the body if you're somebody at James River. That would be one of the biggest marketing, PR, perfect situations for you.
Sure, yeah.
And you blew it up.
Miracle happened.
Yeah, and so the fact that they didn't show it was very telling to me that it something wasn't accurate, something wasn't lining up. Either it didn't happen or the story was wrong. And so I didn't believe it. And I'm not shocked that the stuff has come out that has now. When Show Me the Toes did finally post those pictures, I don't know if it was specifically because I had sent them or somebody else had sent them. I think you could tell that the people who thought she was a victim were like, no, this was a whole scam. This was an entire scam. And I think that it's really hurtful, especially because I know you haven't touched on this, but I talked about in my post. My daughter, was born with one functioning kidney, and she's thriving, by the way. Like,
Good, yeah.
very worried when
Praise God.
yeah, well, when it's your first kid and you're like 21, turning 22, not ideal. And that to say, there are moms and families that struggle with so much worse diagnoses out there. But to have any at all is just not
Yeah,
fun.
you want your kids healthy,
Yeah,
happy, all that.
you want your kid to like come out like just as one would say normal. I know people hate that word now, but normal. And so the family members of mine who are very, I mean, very into James River, like to the point where I'm like, you are a cult follower of James River. I had gone on a graduation trip with one of my friends, and I was also pregnant at the time with another baby, by the way, because my kids are Irish twins, and we're crazy like that. But he had also shown potential kidney issues as well through his ultrasounds, and my daughter did the whole time as well. So it's something that runs in my family. Praise God, this baby doesn't have anything. Hopefully, he doesn't develop anything. But my mom had my daughter while I was on this trip and went to see these family members. And these family members basically were asking about the kidney and had asked us at like her diagnosis appointments because we had to, go up to a specialty clinic.
Sure, yeah.
She's little. And actually, before I tell that story relating to the toes, I remember we went up to see what was wrong. And what we were portrayed at the time was that our daughter was either going to have a mild issue she would grow out of or something that would require surgery.
Oh.
Surgery is scary on a little baby,
Well, yeah.
but the idea it's a fixable condition. Well, we went up there and got blindsided. They showed us the ultrasound pictures on my daughter, and essentially her ureter and kidneys don't line up. And they basically and I don't hate the way they said it, but very bluntly, they're like, there's not a good way to put this, but she has a bum kidney. That's not what we were expecting.
Yeah.
So I was of course, they're like, she's probably gonna live a healthy life. We're gonna have a follow up appointment, whatever. It very devastating here. I remember right when we got out of that appointment, this family member of mine called, and they were on the way. She was like, we're praying that God's gonna do this, and I applaud for like consistency with the faith in that. But when I told them this is the situation, they actually sounded not disappointed in a way where like it's sad news, but disappointed in a way where it's like they were somehow surprised. Like they prayed enough. So fast forward a few months later, they're over there and my mom is explaining updates on the kidneys, which are all good updates, but of course one does not work. And so my family member looks at my daughter, to my mom's recollection, and says, if God can regrow 3 toes, he can grow you a new kidney. And that really set off a really big division where I'm like, this is not okay. You're not going to say that to my daughter. These are the same family members who would tell my brother, lean in harder, pray harder. I'm like,
Yeah.
I've seen how destructive that is. You're not going to bring that in my family. And it really has like divided our family. Like, I don't think that those members of my family think that we're Christian. Of course, there's a divide when it comes to my brother with my mom and my dad and kind of in that sense. But for me, the divide was you said this to my daughter, and I brought it up, and they were super defensive. They were like, are you asking us to leave our church? Because we're not gonna unless God tells us himself. Like, which is very common for people very in the James River.
Right.
So, not just them and their attitude, like it's very common. So it's created that divide. And coming down to the toes, it's like my perspective on the toes is also that you have people who thought this was real. They really did. They
Right.
really leaned into it. And by the way, I did show them the pictures just to be like, hey,
I
like
was kind of curious about that. Yeah.
I was like, hey, these aren't public at the moment that I'm aware of, but you need to see. Still didn't believe me. But they use the toes to basically say, if God can do this, then he can do this. But if that first instance is a scam, that's really hard to say. Like, if my God can do this thing that definitely didn't happen and was a scam and the church allowed to
Right.
propagate it as truth, then he can do this miracle. Then you're basing your miracles first off of something that isn't like true and isn't biblical, but you're giving people false hope based on something that didn't happen. And my husband and I are very comfortable and accepting of the fact that if my daughter, like if she were to be healed, fantastic, but that's not the focus of our prayer.
Right.
Our prayer is that she would be saved and that she would live a long, happy, healthy life, and
Yeah.
with or without a kidney. So, the toe situation literally like directly like came into conversation with my own issue when it came to miracles and healing my own
Yeah.
family.
Well, and again, like we were talking about before, the greatest miracle is that God saves us. And then, even if we are going to look at the miracles in the book of Acts and in the Bible, what is the ultimate goal of those miracles? Always. It is always to point people to Jesus. One of the problems with the Bill Johnson got us spare parts in heaven or
The
whatever, right?
spare body parts room, it's just a closet up in heaven where they're like, go get another kidney,
You're
go
right.
get another eyeball. Somebody needs to see.
But one of the problems is does God really get the glory in the show me the Tova situation? In fact, with that, you don't really see the lady, and I won't take a position on whether or not she was part of it or a victim. I don't really know the details
Yeah.
too deeply, but you don't really see a lot of her like going around praising Jesus for this great miracle. It's more of just, hey, some toes grew back, and then we now know it's kind of a scam.
Well, even more so, it was kind of subtly credited to Bill Johnson and Randy Clark being there. It's like they almost became the person who had credit because in the presence of these two greater leaders who led these healing events, because it was done a certain way, God came down, and that's kind of how it was credited. It wasn't like
Right.
God, like I was praying in my bedroom, I was convicted by this service and I watched my toes and here it wasn't anything like that. It was in the presence of, I think it was Bill Johnson at the time, but Randy Clark was there too. It's like at this Bill Johnson service, healing service that he brought on, this is what happened. I hate to say it, but it's like Bill Johnson was almost the God in that situation. I
Kind
feel
of
like.
a little bit, and again, looking back at what the Bible says, they always turn their focus back to God. Peter's walking around and somebody gets healed. He's like, I didn't really do that. Jesus did that. Whereas, I mean, yeah, I guess sometimes they
I
do
think
use that terminology.
Yeah, they give lip service
But
to
there's
God.
definitely, like you said, oh, Randy Clark's here, Bill Johnson's here, and probably John Lindell when he goes and speaks at some place now, because he's kind of growing in that circle and he's bringing people in and he's going out, and it's probably kind of becoming that same thing where they're like, oh yeah, but remember at his church there was toes that were growing back, there was all these great things, and so it's again like you said, they almost become like the Holy Spirit follows those people. Whereas, what is the Holy Spirit supposed to be doing? Pointing us to Christ, right?
One of my
Convicting us of our sins.
And one of my dad's biggest pet peeves, we laugh about it now. It was a pet peeve when we were at James River. He hated when Lyndall says, "You may be seated in the presence of the Lord." Like, aren't we always in the presence of the Lord? Are we just? Is it just in this room?
This room, yeah.
But I mean, that's kind of how it's treated.
We've talked a little bit about it today, the NAR and prosperity and Bill Johnson. John Lindell has been bringing all of this in. That's a good way to kind of bring a lot of the things we've been talking about. Would you say that that James River is becoming part of NAR, part of the prosperity gospel, part of all of that?
Well, I think they've always, I say always, I think they've been a part of the prosperity movement for longer than they've been a part of some of this more NAR Bethel movement. And I think it's really evident. Well, I'll say this about James River. I don't think James River has had its own solid identity as a church, like that they've just kind of come up with. And one of the reasons I say this is when being on the page and being the admin, you see a lot of both the anonymous and public people posting their stories. And there was one person who had talked about how very, very early in the church, I think it was their mom, had worked in the office, and that Linda was basing his sermons off of MacArthur at the time. Like it wasn't even like his own.
John MacArthur.
Yeah, John MacArthur. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and of course I know some people have thoughts on that, but strictly to the point of they don't have their own identity. It's very much borrowed. To some extent, theologies, and perspectives are going to do that, but they did that for a while. Then Hillsong, it was Hillsong for a very long time, right? Like I can't remember why I know this, but I want to say that there was like James River had gotten either like hand-me-downs or like the exact same sets as some of the Hillsong sets at one point in the 2010s.
Weren't they using the Welcome Home that was the exact thing that Hillsong was using?
I don't remember that. I know there was like this octagon-y, circly backdrop on stage that Hillsong had, and you could see the backdrop on the Hillsong stage in some of these like I think it was the Hulu documentary.
Yeah.
So they were very much modeling Hillsong very heavily. And they, of course, were super into the prosperity gospel, probably more, in my opinion, than they were into NAR.
Yeah.
But then you have Hillsong starts crumbling. And so what comes out of the ash? Now you have James River modeling after Bethel. So I think that they've always been a part of the prosperity gospel for as long as at least I went. And of course, that I think that that's also evident by their perspective on tithing. I know they're not the only church that has this view, but that one, it's required. And two, the whole like if you tithe, you're going to get something in return. I think the whole like wellness and fitness thing, like tell me why a church needs a fitness center. Like all of these things, like to me, scream prosperity gospel. But I think when you're sucked in, like the selling point for James River, at least for us, because some of this stuff is like known in the community, right?
Yeah.
Was that a lot of churches were kind of dead, like the one we were in. I say dead spiritually, they were dead. They're just big social circles. And basically, you have James River over here who's doing expository preaching. You know, John Lindell did take a stance. I don't very well remember this because I was a little bit younger and not in the politics, but there was that proposition. I don't know if it was, the town living or the county or what it was. There's a proposition about something when it came to like the gay, transgender, something, and he had said something, so that drew a huge crowd, and it was biblically consistent. So, in that sense, they get you, but on the back end, they were leaning prosperity gospel. I mean, I even remember my parents, we were being told surprise check in the mail. It's always the story they tell you on Sundays. If you tithe, here's a story. Mike and them were really struggling with a job, and the Lord, they really needed money, and then they decided to tithe. They committed to tithing, and the Lord gave them a check for the car that they needed because their other car broke. It's always that stuff. And my parents started tithing, and they got a surprise check in the mail. You want how much? $0. It was a check for $0. I think God is funny. But that was their leaning was prosperity. And with NAR, I think looking back, I think the NAR stuff started in 2018, 2019, I think was how far the sermons went back. John had been preaching sermons. I looked at this a couple years ago where he talked about how our words basically dictate reality. It was very softly worded to where you wouldn't really catch it otherwise. That what we say matters and that our words kind of dictate reality. And that is manifesting, which by the way, James River has very subtly preached manifesting, especially at least to its youth for a long time. This is a little off topic, but I'm very strongly about this. When you are young and a single female at somewhere like James River, the biggest thing is what husband does God have for you? So what they tell you to do is basically write a list of what you want in a husband. It can be stupid stuff because remember, something they preach, God is in the details. And they say, like, write this list and pray over, and God's going to give you that perfect person. Well, I'll tell you, I love my husband dearly. He is definitely the one for me. He does not fit a lot of things on those lists, that list for me. But if you think about the practice of what they're telling you to do for your husband, at least maybe on lower levels with some youth leaders, they're telling you to manifest your husband.
Right.
They're not really telling you, like, just pray for a good, godly man. I'm going to say this, it sounds so mean. And if my friend ever does listen to this, I love her. But I have a friend who, when it came to dating, was very into this, and she believed that God was absolutely going to have to and would give her a Chiefs fan. Like that was like one of the biggest like
down to the sports team.
And it wasn't even like I don't want to. It's like God's going to give me a Chiefs fan, and so all of that has been around for quite a while. But it was so soft, and now it's like just how it is at Bethel. They're like, if you say it and pray it, God's gonna do it because you have that power and
name it, claim it.
Yep.
All of that awful, awful stuff. No, manifesting, prosperity, NAR, whether those are official movements or just names we give these things, we are seeing a lot of that. Other churches, whether it's Hillsong, Bethel, and Elevation is another one that's problematic. Chris Hodges, what is that? Church of the Highlands. John Lindell had him in there, and he's like, "This is a pastor for pastors," and this big old thing, right? And everyone needs to listen to it. And it's like this really dumb sermon that he preached that was like so great that we all had to listen to, and there was like no gospel message whatsoever. Kind of heavy on law of like here's a bunch of things you need to do, but all those things are very, like you said, kind of subtly creeping in. And I think James River has done a really good job of not of distancing themselves just slightly enough from everybody where, well, yeah, we had Bill Johnson in and I really like him. And yeah, we had Chris Hodges in and I really like him, but we're not necessarily the same thing. We're different. We're like you said, they don't necessarily have their own identity. They're just kind of copying a lot of different identities and kind of creating something built around all of that.
And I'm not super educated on these institutions, but it's not like, Southern Baptist Convention, like you're a part of the Southern Baptist Convention. It's not, I don't know what it's called with the Lutheran churches, but I know they have an official thing because a friend of mine is Lutheran. They have very official institutions. And I know that there's the Assemblies of God, but the way that James River networks is not really like that specific like institutionalism of some of these denominations. It's very book oriented, it's very celeb oriented, and they're all supporting each other. One guy I'd seen on YouTube pointed out that when one guy promotes a book, that's when all of a sudden he starts visiting the churches. He starts going around. It's basically a book tour to all these churches. And so it is kind of an unspoken network. And it kind of has to be that way.
Church of the Highlands, I believe, are the ones that started ARC
I
churches.
think so.
And we're going to do an episode just on this. So I won't get too deep into it. They go around and help smaller churches start up. What model are they promoting when they come up? And a lot of it is the same model that James Rivers trying to copy in all these different churches, and it's lack of elders. You need to write a book. So they're helping these like little mega churches. So they may never grow into James River size or anything like that. So they go around and like you said, they give book tours. The Sizzling Summer series is they kind of invite a bunch of people to come preach at James River, and a lot of those times John's not there. Maybe that's just his vacation time.
Yeah.
But he has spoken during that week at other churches.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he's selling his book. And
Well,
that's fine. He can sell his book. I don't care. But what's happening when Bill Johnson's there? He's selling his book. And this is getting into a realm of speculation. We'll get deeper into it in a couple other episodes. But who's buying those books? We know for a fact through Elevation that Elevation Church buys a lot of Stephen Furtick's books. So he's like, oh, well, I only really make the money off of my book sales. But your church bought a bunch of your books to give away for free or to sell. When you go speak at a church, that church buys some of your books to give away to their congregation. Is it unethical? It seems like it might be. Is it illegal? Probably not.
No, I don't. It probably. I mean, I don't know. I have my own speculations about if James River has, and just as a citizen, if they've been involved in legal stuff. And the only reason I say that is because there was an article that came out with Hillsong falling down that Hillsong was involved in money laundering schemes. And what kind of church was what? Well, first off, you had TD Jakes and those kind of figures involved. I want to say Church of the Highlands was potentially involved in it. And if a church like Church of the Highlands, which is I think on par with James River, was involved,
Right.
and it had to do with the same elements of involvement that James River had with Brian Houston, I mean, I do question some legal stuff there, but in terms of book sales, I mean, I think it definitely crosses the line of unethical for sure. And to like, to what goal is like my bigger question? Because you look at places, and James River, I think, tried this. I don't know how successful they've been, but worship music is another big one. How do you infiltrate the small church? You do it with your music. A church that my husband and I have gone to, it grieves me. It's part of why I have a hard time finding a church is because they'll play the Hillsong, they'll play the Bethel, and the lyrics sound good, but they're coming from people who I would argue are either not Christian or they're not talking about the Jesus of the Bible, right?
Right.
There's a lot of things there that theologically don't line up, even if the words sound nice. And so book sales are one way you get in. Preaching is another way, but then you have that as well. They have for a long time been singing Hillsong. For a long time they've been singing Bethel, and I think that that's primed the congregation who probably doesn't know a lot about Bill Johnson. They're like, "Is this Bethel? Bethel? Oh,
we like their music. Oceans, right?
Yeah,
doesn't like oceans. I wanted to thank you for running that page. I think I joined last year at some point. It was after Show Me the Toes, I think is when I joined. And I don't have a ton of experience with James River. Like, I mean, I'm listening to other people with way more in depth. We were only there for a short amount of time, but I have a lot of connections, my brother and family and friends and stuff. So I'm very invested in James River, but I do feel like I'm maybe more of an outsider because I didn't have that deep of a connection.
It's like the closer you get to the inner circle, like the worse it is. And that's evident from, since I am the only admin on the page, and I've tried to keep it that way just because I don't think everybody quite understands what the page is for sometimes, which it's really hard. In reading a lot of these stories, there are a lot of stories when it comes to employees who had a lot of abusive stuff happen. Of course, people have been fired. There are NDAs involved with them, which is just like insane to me. I mean, at the recent Stronger Men's conference, even the Swartzwaller came out and said, "I'm under an NDA" with James Where it's like, what? It's like you're under an NDA.
Yes.
And it really is sad because even though I wasn't an employee, I wasn't like super heavy into volunteering or anything like that. Just hearing the stories and knowing that like that conviction to start the page really did fill a need in the community. Like I didn't realize how great the need was until after people started joining. It was very rapid. I think we're almost at 2,000 people, and it's expanded where initially it was for people who have left, and then it kind of expanded to you had pastors of churches who are like, I have tons of like congregation members who are like I'm either counseling or have fallen out, like have got out of James River and they're struggling. So I started including pastors who could help people in the page. Then you had people coming on who's like, my son is in the college and is stuck. I have this person, family member who is stuck. I can't get them out. It's divided my family. So the community impact that first off James Rivers had is just insane. And I think when I started the page, I was like, there are probably hundreds. There are thousands of people who have been negatively impacted by James River. You wouldn't know that unless you kind of got everybody together. I'm almost like glad that in starting the page that it wasn't just like a win like there really was a need there because I really do think that that was like a strong conviction and I don't think it was just me. It's just like I felt like I had to do something and I think that God's used it.
Absolutely.
If not for part of it was to find correct theology. People could talk about what correct theology looks like, but I think an aspect I wasn't fully prepared for was how therapeutic it is for people to just get out what happened to them,
Yeah.
to ask questions like, is this right? I mean, I don't think it happens as much anymore, but just the college students coming on and talking about what they went through. And of course, they like paid to go to the school. I mean, it really is just really sad and breaks my heart. But yeah, the fact that it's impacted the community, but like this page filled a need is just really, really good. I like not tooting my own horn, like
No.
like it's just I am glad because I felt that it needed to be done for my own personal. I don't want to feel alone, but to know that there were thousands of other people who felt the exact same way I did, it's reassuring that you're not crazy. The church ostracizes you when you leave. I know of somebody who said that their whole support system cut them off when they left. Whole entire support, friends and family members. And to know that that's not just happening to some of us is, although it's sad, it's like reassuring, like, no, like, we're not the crazy ones. Like, this is real institutionalized, like, problems on the employment side and really theologically troubling, especially for just people who go.
Well, and I've heard some stories of people who have left, criticized James River, lost some friends, and then like a year or two later, those same friends come back and apologize. Like, sorry, I didn't really understand what you were saying, but now, and I think that Show Me the Toes has helped a lot. I say helped in the sense that I think there were a lot of people who were just like, this is off. Connecting with Bill Johnson has also helped a lot because there are a lot of people, like you said, that Bill Johnson's off. We know he's off. So I don't really like him being here. And then we talked, or you just mentioned the latest Stronger Men's Conference. Obviously, that was a big fiasco. So I joined, I think I said last year after Show Me the Toes, and I had been thinking about doing something, and I wasn't sure what. I've made a few amateur films. I like film, but I don't have like the greatest equipment. I don't really have the greatest podcasting equipment either or anything like that. But I wanted to do something because I watched the Hillsong documentaries. I've watched like as many documentaries as I could on churches, and I was seeing the same things from stories, and then being in the group really helped too because I was reading all these other people's stories. I was like, okay, so it's not just a few family and friends, like you said. We're not alone. There's a lot of people who are talking about this, and so basically for the last year, I've been kind of working on this, and then this year I decided I think a podcast would be great. And then the Stronger Men's Conference was like, all right, we got to do this right now.
Like
If we don't do it now,
Yeah.
it's
Well, we thought the toes was like, can it get worse than the
can get
toes?
worse.
It can. And I remember like more people have joined, I think, over the incident of Stronger Men's Conference than the toes. It was reported on more. I mean, I love Good Fight Ministries out in like Blessed Hope Chapel in California. If I lived out there, I would attend. They're like it's run by Joe Schimmel and Chad Davidson. Even they never covered the toes, which made me so sad because I'm like, come on, like there's a church claiming somebody grew 3 toes. They did cover the Stronger Men's Conference, and although they devoted most of the episode to Mark Driscoll, who does have plenty of things to talk about, and everybody has talked about it, at the very end, Chad Davidson compared John Lindell to Jim Jones, and I thought that was very appropriate.
Oh wow.
I was very glad somebody, he's like, this, because what he was talking about was the fact, and this isn't the first time he's done it, but I think it was the first really noticeable time. Lindell had said, don't touch, God's anointed, touch not the anointed, which has nothing to do with them. It's very
Right.
specific to the situation of King Saul and all of that. And he very appropriately called it Jim Jones type behavior. And it's because it is. And what's so sad is the people who are still really involved, like that is the level of which they look at Lindell, whether they are really conscious of that or not. It's really sad, but there are other people who have been in ministry a very long time studying this stuff who are now coming to the realization that it's not just Hillsong, it is these other growing mega churches like James River that are starting to do this, garbage stuff.
John Lindell has said, this got shared recently again when Bill Johnson was coming through. Oh, if people criticize you or try to share videos about Bill Johnson, you tell them that your pastor knows him, right? That he's actually spent time with them, and stop taking these clips out of context. People who are in like the discernment ministries, which is a lot of those people who like review sermon reviews. One of my favorites is Fighting for the Faith. I don't know if you've ever heard that. Chris Roseborough has done multiple things on Bill Johnson. They're not taking little snippets. They're covering an entire sermon. Sometimes in a sermon series, they'll spend like multiple weeks with these people and dissecting what they're actually saying. Bill Johnson believes that we're like little gods almost, right? Like we can be like Jesus because Jesus wasn't really God. So when John says, I've actually spent time with him, it's almost like you're telling your people, it doesn't really matter what's out there, just listen to me.
Well, yeah.
And then I recently heard, I was talking with somebody. He told me that those people on staff are told, and maybe he said this publicly. I don't know. I haven't been able to find the footage of it. If you're on social media and you're doubting the church, that's your fault for being on social media.
Wow.
Which is essentially saying, don't listen to anybody online. We are your church. You listen to us. If somebody's putting out negative press about the church, we're going to put out the positive press. Just listen to what we have to say. I mean, I don't know how else you kind of word that then. Don't listen to anyone outside the church, only the church. Yeah. That's kind of cultish behavior.
It's very, at the very least, like an echo chamber type mentality. And growing up, my dad was very big on teaching me and kind of raising me in the idea of apologetics and being not scared of differing opinions or being scared of what atheists have to think or agnostics have to think, being very open to listening, because even if you don't know in that moment, there's an answer and it's something you can work through, right? It's like, why isn't that the position of James River? Like, look at everything online. And if you have questions, email, even if it's not him specifically, it's like, email us, talk to us. Like, these are things that we want to address, talk to your life groups, or be like, here are the biggest things. I do think John maybe had talked about this and did a really bad job, but really terrible job. Basically being like, these are the big things that people criticize Bethel for. And here are our responses. They really, even though I think they maybe took a little bit of a little sermon on that, if I remember right, that they kind of just shut it all down by being like, listen to us, we're the experts. I mean, and it's so funny too, because I know so many like political conservatives who are at James River who politically are like, well, if the government says this, I'm not going to listen, I'm going to do my own research. And they said that, listen to us, we're the experts on COVID, and look what like that's their mentality. But when it comes to James River, they're like, nope, John Lindell knows best. He's like the Fauci of James River for like these political conservatives. So it's wild that type of thinking of why are we scared of differing opinion doesn't go across the whole board of their thinking. Like in James River, we're only going to trust Lindell, but out here, we're going to question everything. We're going to look into every conspiracy. Like we're going to do everything to come to our own opinion, but that's just not promoted at James River.
No, I kind of agree with a lot of what you're saying there, especially like you said, it's ironic how people can have one view for maybe the world,
Yeah.
and then a different view because it's the church, when really we should be integrating our lives entirely. There should be consistency there, and not just in how we live our ethics, but also, I mean, if you're going to hold the government to one standard, hold your church to that standard too.
Yeah,
right?
if you're gonna hate Fauci because he said, "Trust me, I'm the expert. Don't listen to anybody else." Why aren't you questioning John Lindell when he says that about something far more important, by the way? Like
Absolutely.
getting COVID, masking, wherever you stand on that ultimately is not like like eternal life and death. Like, I guess if you're somebody who's like more progressive listening to this and you're like, I love Fauci. Okay, fine. That's not like the worst thing in the world, right? But you're talking about like eternal life and death, what it means to be a Christian, what is salvation. If you're going to be critical of Fauci, but not somebody over here telling you, listen to me because I know best religiously, that's very alarming, especially when the church is constantly promoting that and clearly within its staff. Yeah, I don't know how true this is, but one person who had left the church had even heard rumors that some of the major leaders that I was around when I was in high school didn't actually leave of their own volition. Like they all took jobs elsewhere, but they were actually fired for questioning Lyndall. That's just rumor. I would, I'm not saying it's true, but I wouldn't be shocked.
Sure.
So if you have a reputation of a church like that, it's important to question, and for James River, if it's really biblical, if they're really solid, they would be able to provide those answers, but they're not.
Have you heard about the lady who was removed from church by 5 individuals because she refused to take down a post, or was accused of refusing to take down a post? It's a very interesting story.
I think it was prior to her maybe getting asked out of the church, or maybe it was kind of coinciding. She was posting on somebody else's page, and I actually just reached out. I was like, "Hey, you should share this on our private page." I invited her, and then of course when she came on, she's like, "Here's what happened." It's like barf all this like terrible things. It's like on Mother's Day. Yeah, no,
So she was removed on Mother's Day by 5 individuals. I believe it was 3 staff, or 2 staff and three.
I thought it was 3 security guards and a couple county.
It was 5
sheriff's
total.
officers.
I think it was 2 sheriffs and 3 staffers. But her posts had been kind of critical of the men's conference, which we haven't really talked about. She was kind of critical of that, John Lindell, and some issues with like finances and things like that. And hoping to have her on the podcast. But she was kind of critical, and then I guess they had asked her to take down the post, or they didn't ask her, actually, is what she said. But because she didn't take it down, they like implied that she did, and she was
Yeah,
removed.
and they like dissected it. That was the
Literally,
weird
you
thing to me. They
could,
dissected it and
yeah.
like, here's your post. We have it highlighted and all these comments. It's like, whoa.
But the thing that's really interesting to me is they removed her from church for posting things that they didn't like. They didn't even want her to be in the building because she had posted things that they didn't like. They were critical of them. I know that somebody that was let go from James River, they have internally told the story that he chose to leave on his own, and that he was posting just all over the place, just so critical. And he was like, I'm just out. When the actual story was, he was trying to make change from within, and then he wasn't really seeing anything. And so he kind of talked to people outside of the church. They found out about it, kind of digging, snooping into it. So then he ended up getting fired, and they asked him to sign an NDA, and he didn't. So good for him. And so hopefully we'll get that. I don't know when we'll get that interview out, but
Well, it really puts fear. I know somebody roughly my age who is kind of getting into the inner circle of some leadership. I don't know their position exactly, but when they post about it, I see it. Not on the page. Like they're very involved in James River. And I actually reached out to them and I said, "Hey, do you guys like as like staff like have any just any perspective on maybe whether we agree with it or not, maybe we shouldn't have had, the guy swallowing the sword at the men's conference." And she was very much like, no, we trust Lyndall and all this stuff. And this was right before the one person had gotten fired and didn't sign the NDA and has come out about it. But it really shows you how some of the stuff they're saying, like they might not actually, I'm not saying for this particular couple, they may be all in, but really makes you think like, are these people being honest when they're asked these questions, or is it like my livelihood is on the line? If I say anything to anybody, I could get fired. Because I know for my friend who was my maid of honor at my bachelorette party, which was not crazy or anything, but I was like, hey, maybe like a bottle of champagne to celebrate would be fun. Which, to be fair, I was like almost 21, but I'm like, you get married once. And I'm not saying that's, right or anything, but that was the situation. And her justification for being like, this is going to be a dry party, even though most of my friends were like 21 and over,
yeah.
Was not really. I mean, she kind of used this as an excuse, but it wasn't like, hey, underage drinking is bad, right? It was, or anything like that. It was, if I get caught with just a picture of, because somebody even brought up, what if we did mocktails? Like just, juice, right? Juice and fancy cup with water with umbrellas. She had said, if I get caught with pictures, if she was on staff at the time, I will get fired. If I just, it would just incriminating photos that may not even be alcohol. And for that reason, because she was organizing the party, she was like, not even mocktails,
Okay.
which kind of upset me because like it's not your party, it's my party. I'm the bride, but it really shows you how under the thumb it is. Like, if it's that way with something like alcohol, which I know there are varying opinions on alcohol use as a Christian, but if it's that under the thumb with alcohol, I truly believe like when it comes to the more core issues of James River, that it's even more so. And you might have people there on staff who are saying all the right things, and when they're asked questions, they promote the church, but maybe when it's just them and their spouse, they're like, what do we do? Like, I don't know how to deal with this. If we say something, we're getting fired. If we say this, we're gonna get kicked out. We've dedicated so many hours. What will we look like? What more importantly, I would hope that people would wonder is like, what does this mean about our faith? What does this mean about, salvation? Are we saved? Like really important questions that might be going on behind closed doors. But James River is such, in my opinion, from just stories on the page, an abusive institution that people don't come forward. I mean, you're talking about an institution that this is kind of out of left field, but I have seen a lot of stories about individual spouses who one spouse was physically or sexually or in some way abusive, criminally. I would say like they were
Yeah.
abusive, like in all regards, they were cheating or whatever. And I know of one instance where the couple got divorced and the church, knowing the allegations, took on the abusive spouse on staff. And others where in certain situations of counseling or whatever that they have brought in, this couple to counsel them, and they've taken the side of the abuser and basically told the spouse, like I said, multiple stories of this. They've told the spouse, well, you chose to be married, or you can't divorce. Divorce is a sin, or you're just stuck with this. You signed up for this. So I mean, you're talking about an institution that has taken on people like that on staff too. Like it is just an institution that I mean, I understand why people might be scared to leave at the end of the
Absolutely.
day.
Well, in all these stories you're hearing, after I posted that I was going to be doing this, I said, "Hey, if anybody, wants to tell their story," and the invite is still there. If anybody's listening to it and they're like, "I have a James River story that I want to get out," please contact us and would set up an interview. But as I'm hearing these stories and you're hearing the same thing, and you're probably actually hearing more because you're actually running the page and like you said, people are joining and they're telling you things, and it's the same story over and over again of when you criticize, it seems to be that there's a culture there that isn't friendly to criticism at all. And so instead of being, oh, you have this concern, let's address that concern. Because even with the alcohol thing, in a very healthy church, and you're right, there's differing opinions on alcohol. I personally don't see it as a sin. I'll just throw that out there. Like I,
They
I
were
think
we're on the same page.
I
Like
think that you can find a good case to be made that drinking in and of itself is not a sin. Drunkenness, sure. I'm in agreement with you on that. But even if you go to a healthy church that says a lot of Southern Baptist churches are this way, like
we have a very good friend who goes to a church that we visited, and the pastor was like, and drinking beer is of the devil. And I remember sitting there, I'm like, I love this couple. They have like such like one of the purest hearts. But no, I don't agree with that. So yeah, I mean you're right. There can be very, very healthy,
yeah,
very conservative in terms of theology churches that believe that.
absolutely. And so when with the differing views in a healthy church, they're going to deal with that particular issue in a healthy way.
Yeah.
And so they'll say, "Hey, we heard that maybe you had a drink on, last weekend. Well, here's what we believe at this church. Here's why we think that was wrong." And you can approach that in a very healthy way. But if people are literally scared of even the appearance of possibly drinking alcohol because they're so scared of that, I 100% agree with you that once you start to get into other issues, which may be more important issues than that. Not to say that alcohol isn't an important issue to some people, people with addictions and things like that. But I'm just saying, like, you get into issues of you're having heretics at your church, you're having all of these fake healings. I don't think that you would feel comfortable then bringing anything forward. And I think there is sort of that internalization of like, I'm keep my head down. I like everything's polished there.
Everything's formulaic. Like
Yeah.
even in their theology, this friend, now this is just speculation. I don't mean anything ill against my friend or anybody my age, but they really make it sound like if you do XYZ, you will end up with XYZ. So if you, for instance, wait till marriage, and I have a friend who went through the premarital counseling, and she said that's like all they talk to you about is like waiting till marriage. Like you're engaged, and it's like, oh, you're almost there. But like if you wait till marriage, your marriage is going to be perfect, like in that regard. Which any married couple is like, whoa, that's it's not formulaic like that, right? Like life's not perfect like that. Or if you avoid alcohol, if you do all these things, or if you pray more, then this equals you having a better life. And this friend of mine, and I love her to death, had come to me, and we were very divided. She wouldn't be involved in my life. And she basically told me, I'm jealous that you're married and I'm jealous that you have kids. And, I really struggle with this. And for that, like my heart, it's like, oh, like, but I think that it has something to do with a deeper issue. If she's going to a church, that I once also bought into this idea that if you do everything right, like everything you want will come to you. And so you think about it this way: you have a girl who wants to be in a relationship and wants to be married and wants to have the kids and all that. And I had other friends like this as well, and that's not happening for you. Like you're doing everything right, but that's not happening. They have a friend over here who's not in James River and not doing everything right, and is not praying that to the same degree on Sunday or whatever. Or you know at the time I would drink the occasional drink, you know what I mean. And that they get it, then what's wrong with me? It's kind of like the same thing as the healing. It's like, what am I doing wrong? Like, God, why can't I have everything I want? And I just speculate. I don't know if she would agree or deny that, but that's kind of what I noticed in our friendship. And that's kind of how it is. Like if you do everything right, everything perfect will come to you.
Right. It's the same thing with the tithing. If you tithe every Sunday, if you give 10% or more, you can't outgive God, right? All of that, then you will be blessed tenfold or hundredfold or however many folds it is nowadays. Well, thank you so much, Kadie, for being on here today with me, and we've had a really great talk. We've been talking for quite a while now, and it's really great to get to know you. I know you through the group. I've seen comments and posts and things like that. Is there anything you want to say about the group or about anything else that any closing thoughts that you might have?
Yeah, so it's of course it's a private group now because as people on the page point out, there have been spies. And I've seen them. That's always
Real
fun.
quick, okay, we're gonna pause. That reminds me of a question, and they're tied together, okay?
Okay.
First question is, has anybody from James River reached out to you because of this group? And second, the spies, what's up with the spies? So those are kind of two
Yeah.
separate questions, but kind of in the same vein. Because I forgot I was going to ask you
Yeah.
that.
There's not very many that I've seen. Of course, it is hard to vet everybody to the nth degree. I don't have time to Facebook stalk 300 people at a time, right? When the page was public, the former, I don't even know if I want to say his name because he's not a public figure, but the former worship leader actually tried to post on the group, and I had it set to like you have to be approved. Tried to post to the group a very demeaning post where it was like, this is divisive, this is James, whatever, very very in support of James River. And I actually reached out, very long message to this guy, and I was like, hey, because he had specifically said the admin should be ashamed or something. I'm like, hi, I'm the admin, I'm a real person with a face and a family. And I had messaged him. Nobody has reached out to me that I can think of off the top of my head. Of course, I haven't gone through my whole inbox of requests because sometimes I get a lot. But some people who did try to join, I speculate there was a Lindell who did try to join. It was a cousin, I think, somebody out of state. I think they lived in Colorado or something. And I was really
You're sure they're connected?
Yes,
Okay,
they
okay.
were. They were.
It's not just a
Yeah,
random name.
I think David Lindell was the first person to show up that I noticed in their mutual
Okay.
friends. I was really torn because I thought, is it possible that not all the family agrees with the Lindells and maybe they have a story? But then I was like, I don't want to risk it. And that's when I started instituting the you have questions to join. It's like a little interview process, and you have to answer all the questions if you want to join. Otherwise, I say decline. Even
Yeah.
if you just forgot, like come back and ask again. But one of the Lindells did try to join. The former worship leader had joined when it was public and tried to post, and I kicked them off. And there have been people who have come on, and a lot of it was when the page was public. I think that was the onslaught. And so now it's a more vetted process, but I wasn't able to go back and find everybody. There are people who will join the page. Some people will message me and be like, hey, I know this fact for a fact this person goes to James Church, look at their page, go to their page. It's like, look how many people were saved at the week of power this past
Yeah.
Sunday. And so they are on there. I don't think there's as many as some people maybe are paranoid that are, but they're definitely there.
So you haven't had any interactions of anybody coming at you other than that youth pastor,
Yeah.
worship leader.
I was worried in the beginning that if this got traction, that like somebody from the church would reach out in a threatening way. Just something I was prepared for. Like they have attorneys and stuff, but not that I'm actually afraid anything illegal is happening, but I was just preparing myself like, hey, this might actually happen against the page.
Yeah.
Because they are very, I think, concerned about that kind of criticism. And I don't know if maybe the page just isn't big enough. Maybe if it gets to a certain point, they'll start to eyeball it a little bit more. But that was something that I had kind of emotionally prepared for in the beginning.
Well, I know on their posts, any posts that they do, like if they do their Wednesday night prayer service, it's public. And I was watching when he gave his, I call it a press conference, but when he gave that um, Wednesday night after the Stronger Men's Conference,
They called it repentance.
Yeah.
That was promoted with tithe money.
I was commenting on the on the thing live as I was watching, and they were getting deleted so fast. I mean, there was some poor intern there that night was just deleting.
Some James River College student with unpaid.
I think they eventually just turned him off because it was just easier.
Well, and I've had comments deleted on much posts from years, like a couple of years ago when Bill Johnson first came. Like that's the censorship I think is more noticeable now, but it's not new. They were deleting some of my comments a long time ago.
Sure.
On Instagram, which is super fun.
So sorry to interrupt your little spiel there,
Yeah.
but it just that popped in my head of asking you about if anybody from James River had reached out to you or anything like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, the group, you're the admin of it. You can share the name if you want. I haven't shared it.
It's called Finding Jesus After Leaving James River. It's the only page with that name that I'm aware of. And one of the things that actually I bring to the group again, because there's so many new people, people will often criticize why it's called that. They're well-meaning people as well. We're like, well, I know Jesus and I left James River, whatever. But the purpose of the group, the reason that I really felt called to name it that way, or convicted to name it that way, is because James River is not preaching Jesus biblically. Like the Jesus they are preaching is not the Jesus of the Bible. And even if you've grown up a Christian, even if you are a Christian at James River, I think there is an element of finding who Jesus is after you leave.
Absolutely.
Not everybody on the page is even a believer too. There are people who have been so hurt by James River they completely left the faith, and there's nobody reaching out. There's no ministry, there's no voice for them talking about their experiences. Maybe if they go to therapy, that might be some of the only things they get. And so that's part of why it's called that, because the goal is that by coming onto the group we can have not only just discussions about theology and what is correct theology. And to be fair, there are people on the spectrum everywhere. I mean, at one point I remember the Calvinists versus the non-Calvinists became a doctrinal subject. But you have charismatics who have left, who are on the page, and maybe just not as charismatic. You have Calvinists who have always been against this theology. And really the page talks about what's wrong with the NAR movement, what's wrong with James River. You also just have testimonies of people who have left, who just want to talk about their story for the first time ever because they've not had an audience. I say audience, like they haven't had people to talk to, or anybody who would care to listen, because often when you leave you're more surrounded with the people still there than the people not. And so that's the goal of the group, is to just give a community to people who have left or who have been impacted by James River, who really just need to find that right relationship, even if they know what it is, just to continue to help others. So that way, as there's this onslaught of people who need Jesus, and need to hear the gospel, especially coming out of the institution that is James River, there's just a community for that. And so if you want to join, it's on Facebook. I'm going to say this to people because not everybody reads this when they join. You do have to answer all of the questions. And for the most part, like, I do the vetting process pretty thoroughly. There are people who will go like, want to, curious, have left, whatever. It's like, give me a real, like, use full sentences so I know
you
that
don't need a novel, but you don't need
I don't need it. Well, and if you want to write a novel, that's fine. I'll read it. I do read them. Sometimes my husband will ask me, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Sorry, I have people asking to join, and they're telling me their life story. It's totally fine." But yeah, if you have left James River, or if you have family members stuck, or even if you're a pastor who has dealt with the James River issue specifically in your congregation, and you're wanting to help guide people afterwards, a lot of people on the page are looking for churches. That's the biggest thing. I think people struggle with finding churches. Feel free to request to join. like I said, full sentences, please. Tell me why you want to join. Tell me a little bit about yourself. And yeah, that's, I want it to be a place, and I want it to be more well known, not because of anything for me. Like, it's not to my glorification or anything, but because I know that as much as our group is big, there are still lots of people out there who aren't aware there's that community, aren't aware that there are other perspectives, and don't really know what to do, and don't know that there are other churches to go to. They think that Hillsong and Bethel are the big ones, but James River has just as much impact as those churches. And I think that in the future, unless something happens and they crumble, you're going to see them come to the stage a little bit more competitively with these churches. And so, yeah, if you've struggled with that in any capacity, please feel free to join and reach out and tell your story. I mean, as much as I know that you're having people tell their James River story, if you don't want to on a podcast, a lot of people anonymously talk.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, no, thank you so much for running that page. I found just a lot of value, just because I have a big heart for people who have been church hurt. My church hurt story actually is not at James River. It is actually at the church we went to before the current church we went to after James River. So in that period of time there, it was a great church. We loved the pastor. And then that pastor decided to take a different position at a different church, and they brought in a new pastor, and that pastor was like a dictator and fired some elders, or I can't remember exactly how it worked, if one just retired. But anyways, he installed a new elder. He said he was an elder and started preaching just heavy law, like you need to do all these things, right? And I kind of had approached him about a few different things, and at one point he basically said, "There's the door. You need to leave." He blatantly lied in front of the entire congregation about me. Nothing bad. It was actually a good thing he lied about. He said he offered me a job that he never offered me. And but it was to not give me that job.
Right.
I didn't even apply for it, you know. So awful situation. There was a lot of things that happened. It's not the place to unpack all of that. Maybe I'll post it in the group just so people can be therapeutic with it. But all that to say that church hurt, I have a big heart for it because I was bitter at the church. I didn't give up Jesus at all, but we spent some time, my wife and I, not in church because of our experiences at this church. And it's been a big process of finally realizing what our own theology is. So we started going to a Lutheran church, and I know that's kind of like a weird out there thing for some people, but we found a lot of value there. And I'm at the point now where I feel like get into a church. If you are charismatic, there are churches that are charismatic that are not bad. They're still preaching the gospel. If you're a Calvinist, I love Calvin. I was a Calvinist for 10 years. Like there are so many good Reformed churches. There's actually a new Presbyterian church coming into Springfield, I think in the fall. And I'm so excited for that. If I wasn't a Lutheran, I would probably be a part of that church plant. So I'm really excited about that. That's going to be really great for a lot of people. So there's a lot of really good churches. I found a lot of value in like liturgical church stuff where we say the Lord's Prayer, we say the Apostles' Creed. It just reminds us of those basic church doctrines. All that to say, whatever your specific sort of theological bent is, find a good church that will help you grow, because as long as our focus is on Christ and salvation by grace through faith, that's the core of Christianity, right?
Yeah.
It's not by works. So if you're in a works-based church, maybe find a different one. But if you're at a church that is preaching the gospel, that it is all Jesus's work on the cross, and that's how you're saved, that's a healthy church in my opinion.
Yeah.
And who cares what the music is, unless it's Bethel or Hillsong. But if it's hymns, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That doesn't mean you're a dead church just because they're singing hymns or
Right.
something.
Well, and especially, you said like it was a process with you and your wife. For anybody listening who's like, oh, maybe this person has it all together. My husband and I don't. We haven't solidly found a church, and we left years ago. And my convictions are very strong about the music, and so if it is really hard to find a church, you're like, gosh, like, am I a good Christian because I
Yeah.
can't find one? You're not alone in that. Talking to the audience here, I know you found a church, but it is really hard. And we are, I mean, not to mention we have like bazillion kids, it feels like, and on the on the way. So that's already its own challenge in going to church, but it is really hard to find, I think a church anymore, really easily, because of so much stuff. And that's where the page really tries to focus on that. You're right, they are out there.
Mhm.
but don't feel like, I think it's important not to put all the emphasis on church. And James River puts all the emphasis on church.
Correct.
That, there are, I mean, if you really think about it, like there are house churches out there with good believers in it. Like they're like, it really doesn't have to even be institutionalized, in my opinion, like, like Southern Baptist or Assemblies of God or whatever. All that to say, it is a process, and you may not find a church immediately. It may take a period of time of figuring out what theology, figuring out, like, I think the hard question for me was, am I even saved? Like, have I dabbled in the new age? Am I a new ager with some of the stuff that was happening at James River? And those are really hard, reflective questions that I think come naturally after you leave somewhere like James River or leave a church just like that. And it is a process, and it is okay to go through
Absolutely.
that and to work through that. It's not going to be an overnight process, at least in my experience.
Oh no, absolutely not. And like I said, we were in the non-church category for quite a while. And it's actually funny because I was reading a lot of theology, watching a lot of theology stuff. I felt like I actually grew a lot, but we were just so hurt by the church that we weren't actually actively involved in a church. We visited a lot of different churches, and just none of them felt what we were looking for. And I think ultimately I didn't realize it, but I was just kind of slowly developing Lutheran theology without realizing it. Um, but you're absolutely right. I don't have it all figured out either, and my thing is just to encourage everybody to not give up Christ because of
Yes.
the church hurt, and to continue to pursue him, to continue to read. If you want to join this group, join the group. Talk to people. You can post on our page and send us messages, and we'll talk to you about stuff. If you have questions, that's a big thing. Is at a church like James River, if you have a question, you might feel like you can't ask it because then you're going to be critical. Oh, is what Bill Johnson's doing, is that wrong? I don't know. I don't find that in my Bible. Those are questions that are totally welcome in your group, and I love to have those kinds of conversations too. So it's healthy to ask those questions, and that kind of helps you develop your theology. So I would just say to anybody listening, just really encourage you to not give up God just because you've been hurt. And I love your group. I've seen a lot of really great interactions, some interesting ones too, but but it's been a really great experience, and thank you so much for being on. I feel like we've got like the celebrity of the group on the podcast.
I don't
So
feel like this.
yeah, no, you're the one that started this whole thing. So, and I do feel like you do get a little bit of credit because as I was looking at reading these stories, it was like, okay, I want to tell this story about James River, but there is a story to tell, and
Yeah.
it wasn't just my experience or my friend's experience or brother or whatever. It was no, there's actually an experience here, and it's varying. And what we're doing with these interviews is we're putting pieces together for the listener. I think your group does a great job of ministering to people and letting people kind of vent in that sort of safe space.
Yeah.
This is a public space where we're going to try and build the case with different episodes, different interviews with different focuses. If it's a former employee, they're going to talk about those sorts of things. If it's you told us about your experience, and
Yeah.
different people will have different experiences, and hopefully we can sort of build the case with our first season here of what's kind of going on at James River. Because really, this season is looking at kind of that mega church. The podcast called Bad Fruit, which is based off of the passage where Jesus is talking, looking out for false teachers because they're bearing bad fruit. And so we're kind of focused just on that sort of mega church NAR kind of theology, and we're kind of microscoped in on James River and using it as a case study to kind of look at all of that.
Yeah.
And so we are local here. James River's local, so it just kind of makes sense. And again, we've been wanting to tell the story of James River, and now I feel like with all of those things, especially with the men's conference, it's like there's an explosion here, and I really feel like, and again, I'm just speculating, who knows, but I really feel like we're on the cusp of James River either going full on like just Bill Johnson gaslight everybody that anything bad ever happened, or maybe falling apart like Hillsong did.
Yeah.
Like I feel like it could go either way at this point, and I think it's because of this men's conference event. I think there's enough people who are looking at this now. I mean, you mentioned you're a conservative. you've probably know who Matt Walsh is, right?
Yes.
He talked about the men's
Matt, a
conference.
lot of people had takes on it. I thought Matt Walsh had a very good, which I know that like a lot of Christians, like he's Catholic. I still think he had one of the better takes on the internet of the conference.
And I'm not even taking a position on whether you should listen to him or not. I'm just simply saying even that level
even
of
the Daily Wire with all of the stuff that they do,
they were able to do a whole segment on it. And I'm not a huge Matt Walsh fan, but that particular segment was probably the best.
Yeah, or Brandon Tatum did. I mean, he's doing a whole thing where he's kind of talking about pastors in general. He's been covering that case of the I don't know what the status is, but the woman who committed suicide allegedly. He's been doing that, but he's covering that. But right before he got kind of in an episode, like an episodic covering of that, he was like covering James River and talking about how his comments were getting deleted by James River. And he's not a I don't think a very religious. I mean, he's a Christian. He's he claims to be a Christian. I don't watch a lot of his stuff, but he's primarily a political conservative.
Sure, yeah.
And yeah, a lot of them have covered. I think Fundy Friday. I don't know much about that podcast, but is one that covers kind of like this controversial culty stuff, and I think they even touched on.
Aren't they isn't that an atheist who runs that one?
I don't think they're a Christian, but I don't listen to them. So what I know could be like
I think
just
they were in the Shiny Happy People.
I think they were. I think they were. Yeah. But like it just
yeah,
so it's not even just like it's all kinds of people.
Right. And I think that was my main point is, and you're agreeing with me and actually validating the point even more. It's not just us locally who have been there. This has reached national level. And maybe it's partially because Mark Driscoll's involved and he's got his own controversies and everything like that.
Yeah.
And he's kind of a name brand speaker kind of thing. But at the same time, I think this event with a sword swallower and everything, like it was just so big that people had to comment on it. It just you could not. So I do kind of feel like we're at this point now where it's starting to kind of come bubble up. So again, just appreciate you running that page. Any closing thoughts, and then we can just kind of end the podcast.
I guess my only closing thought or thing would be, like I said, if you want to join the page, you're more than welcome. But if there's anybody listening who is at James River or at a church just like James River, you're listening, you're like, gosh, it sounds a lot like my church. I guess my personal encouragement to anybody would be one, like, don't be afraid of questions. Like, just personally, do not be afraid of asking questions or somebody asking you questions. It's not personal, at least most of the time. It shouldn't be. I know there are people out there, but don't be afraid of questions. Don't be afraid, like, if you question God's anointed or if you do all these things like that, you're not going to be a Christian. Like, I think the Bible has a very strong case for, questioning and being skeptical and using the word. Know that you're not alone. Know that it's not bad to ask those questions. I think that's just the biggest thing. And if you're even just for a second taking a second to consider, do I need to leave? Is this the place for me? Don't like let that little thought just go away. Like really, find people. You're not going to find them at James River, but find people in your community who will talk to you about these things, and maybe other pastors, other whatever you can to get out, because I think the theological part is really hard. I think the community part can be harder for people. And so like, know that there are those of us who have left, who have gone through it, and there is a brighter side on the other side. And that I think that Christ's work is working these things for his good, like these doctrinal problems coming to light. I think that it's a very good thing. Don't be afraid of asking those questions. Don't be afraid of reaching out, because those of us on the other side, it's not just that we want to win against James, or like we genuinely care about you who feel stuck and don't know where to go, because we've been there. So yeah, that would be my closing thought is don't be afraid. There's more of us than I think many realize.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode, my interview with Kadie. I really enjoyed it. It was one of the first interviews that I did, and just her whole story of why she started the Facebook page. And I think that it's something that is very pertinent to the conversation we've been having. And she touches on some of the things that we've been talking about in the last few episodes about prophecy and healings and all those different things. So I hope that you enjoyed it. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/badfruitpodcast. We also have an email address. If you would like to email us, you can at badfruitpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. We also have merch. We have t-shirts and hats and sweatshirts and stickers and magnets and all kinds of things. I'll have that link in the show notes there. And also, I know that everyone asks for money, and so I'm not really asking for money. I'm just simply putting it out there that if you have found value in this podcast this season and would like to help us get even better equipment, expand into different areas, do more research, those sorts of things, we would love for you to support us. And I will include a link in the show notes for how to do that. It can be a one-time donation, it can be a reoccurring one, whatever you want to do. And I just want to thank everyone who is supporting us currently. We really, really do appreciate that. Thank you so much again for listening this season, and we're really looking forward to jumping into next season, and I think it's going to be really, really good. So God bless, and we'll talk to you next time.